The auction block Marcus Chun had seen bad days before, but this one took the prize. 3 days ago, he had been a free man, captain of his own cargo ship, hauling medical supplies through the Outer Rim territories. And now he stood on a metal platform, with a collar around his neck and a price tag, floating above his head in alien script. The Kethvari slave market smelled like despair and something that reminded him of burnt copper. And the lights were too bright, and the crowd was too loud, and Marcus wanted nothing more than to close his eyes and wake up somewhere else. But he kept his eyes open because his father had taught him one thing above all else: never let them see you break. Around him stood 40 other humans, men and women who had been captured from ships and colonies across the frontier. And most of them were crying or shaking or staring at the floor with empty eyes. And Marcus understood their fear because he felt it too. The difference was that he refused to show it. The auctioneer was a fat creature with 6 arms and skin like wet leather, and it spoke in a language that the translator chip in Marcus's ear converted into broken English, calling out prices and descriptions like they were selling furniture instead of people. Strong male, good teeth, suitable for mining or entertainment, the auctioneer said when Marcus was pushed forward. And the crowd murmured with mild interest. Marcus had been a Marine for 8 years before becoming a cargo hauler, and he had survived 3 colonial wars and a pirate ambush and a bar fight on Titan that had left him with a scar across his jaw. And he was not going to let some 6-armed slug sell him like a piece of meat without at least making things difficult. "I also do parties," Marcus said loudly, and several aliens in the crowd turned to look at him with confusion. The auctioneer hit him with a shock stick, and Marcus fell to his knees, his muscles screaming. But he laughed through the pain, because what else could he do? That was when the doors at the back of the auction house opened and everything changed. The crowd went silent, and Marcus felt a wave of fear wash through the room that had nothing to do with him. And he looked up to see what had caused such a reaction. 7 figures walked through the parting crowd, and they were unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. They stood over 7 feet tall with scales that shimmered between deep purple and black, and their eyes glowed golden in the dim light. And they moved with the kind of grace that told Marcus they were predators, real predators. The kind that sat at the top of the food chain and never had to worry about anything. The Volanthi, his translator whispered in his ear, warriors of the Volanthi sovereignty. Most dangerous species in the known galaxy. Marcus had heard stories about the Volanthi, and none of them were pleasant. And the fact that they were here in a slave market could not mean anything good. The leader of the group stepped forward, and Marcus realized with surprise that it was female, though the differences were subtle. And she wore armor that looked like it had been grown rather than made. And her golden eyes scanned the room with the cold calculation of a hunter selecting prey. Commander Sarath Valkyra, his translator, provided. First guard to Queen Mixara of the Volanthi sovereignty. She was looking for something, Marcus could tell. And the way she dismissed each human with barely a glance told him that whatever she wanted, she was not finding it. Then her eyes landed on him. Marcus was still on his knees from the shock stick, but he forced himself to meet her gaze because he had never backed down from anyone, and he was not about to start now. And something flickered in those golden eyes, something that might have been surprise or curiosity, or maybe just hunger. They stared at each other for a long moment, and the silence in the auction house was absolute, and Marcus knew he should look away. Knew that challenging an apex predator was the stupidest thing he could possibly do. But his body refused to cooperate. "Take a picture," Marcus said, his voice hoarse from the shock stick. "It will last longer." Several of the Volanthi warriors reached for their weapons, and Marcus heard gasps from the crowd. And he was fairly certain he had just signed his own death warrant. But Commander Sarath raised one clawed hand and her warriors stopped. And she tilted her head to the side in a gesture that seemed almost curious. and the corner of her mouth lifted in what might have been amusement. "This one," she said, and her voice was like silk over steel. "I will take this one." The auctioneer stammered something about the bidding process and proper protocols, and Sareth named a price that was triple the highest bid anyone had ever made for a human. And suddenly, the auctioneer was very happy to skip the bidding process. Marcus was unchained from the platform and marched toward the Volanthi delegation. And as he passed the other humans, he saw hope dying in their eyes. Because if the Volanthi wanted him then, he was going somewhere no human had ever returned from. Sareth looked down at him as he was brought before her. And up close, she was even more terrifying, all muscle and scales and barely contained violence. And Marcus had to crane his neck to meet her eyes. "You do not fear," she said. And it was not a question. "I am terrified," Marcus admitted. "But my father always said fear is just excitement with bad marketing." Something shifted in her expression, and Marcus could not tell if she was amused or annoyed or planning to eat him on the spot. "You will come with us to Volanthos Prime," she said. "You will be a gift for my queen." "A gift," Marcus repeated. "Like a pet, like a curiosity," Sareth corrected. "My queen collects interesting things, and you, human, are interesting." She turned and walked away, and her warriors grabbed Marcus by the arms and dragged him along. And as they left the auction house, Marcus looked back one last time at the other humans. Still standing on the platform, he could not save them. And that knowledge burned in his chest like acid. But he made a silent promise that if he survived whatever was coming, he would find a way to change things. The Volanthi ship was waiting outside, sleek and black and deadly. And as Marcus was pushed up the boarding ramp, he caught one last glimpse of the station through a viewport. Somewhere out there was Earth, and his mother who still thought he was alive, and a life he might never see again. "Welcome to your new life, human," Sareth said from behind him. And there was something in her voice that Marcus could not identify. He did not look back. The ship's engines roared to life, and Marcus felt the deck shift beneath his feet as they left the station behind. And he was heading toward a planet no human had ever seen. As a gift for a queen who collected interesting things, Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath and reminded himself that he had survived worse. He was lying, of course, but sometimes lies were all that kept a person going. The stars streaked past the viewport as the ship jumped to faster than light speed. And Marcus Chun, former Marine, former cargo captain, current slave, began the longest journey of his life. The menagerie, the Queen's menagerie, was not what Marcus had expected. Had imagined cages and chains and dark rooms filled with suffering creatures. But instead he found himself standing in a biodome the size of a small city, with artificial sunlight streaming down through a crystalline ceiling and forests and grasslands and even a small ocean, stretching out in every direction. It was beautiful. And Marcus hated it immediately because beautiful prisons were still prisons. "You will live here," the Volanthi guard told him as the entrance sealed behind them. "You will be fed and cared for, and in return, you will be quiet and decorative and cause no trouble." "Quiet and decorative," Marcus repeated. "Those are not really my strengths." The guard did not respond, simply turned and walked away, leaving Marcus alone at the edge of what appeared to be a jungle filled with plants he did not recognize and sounds he could not identify. Marcus stood there for a long moment, taking stock of his situation. He was trapped on an alien planet inside a biodome filled with creatures from across the galaxy. And he had no weapons and no allies and no way to contact anyone who might help him. And the only person who seemed even slightly interested in him was a 7-foot warrior who had bought him as a gift. Things were not looking great, but Marcus had learned long ago that feeling sorry for yourself was a waste of time. So he squared his shoulders and walked into the jungle to see what he was working with. The first week was Educational Marcus discovered that the menagerie contained over 200 different species from nearly 100 different worlds, and most of them were just as trapped as he was. And none of them had ever thought to do anything about it. "We cannot escape," a creature that looked like a talking crystal told him on his third day. "The barriers are impossible to breach, and the guards are everywhere, and resistance only brings punishment." "Have you actually tried to escape?" Marcus asked. "No," the crystal admitted. "But everyone knows it is impossible." Marcus smiled and got to work. He started small, learning the routines of the guards and the feeding schedules and the layout of the biodome. And he talked to every creature willing to talk and learned their stories and their skills and their dreams. Discovered that the nutrient paste they were fed was efficient but joyless. So he found a way to trade favors with a kitchen worker and smuggled in actual food. And suddenly, Marcus was the most popular creature in the menagerie, taught a pack of six-legged predators from a world called Veth how to play fetch. And they followed him around like oversized dogs. And the Volanthi guards did not know what to make of it, organized the other captives into work groups, assigning tasks based on ability and interest. And the menagerie went from a collection of sad individuals to something that almost resembled a community. He introduced concepts that the other species had never heard of: democracy, fair distribution, collective action, the radical idea that they deserve better than to be decorative curiosities in a queen's collection. Marcus escaped twice during that first week, not to freedom, but to the palace kitchens, because he was determined to find something that tasted like coffee. Both times he was caught and returned to the menagerie. And both times, Commander Sereth was the one who caught him. "You are making my job very difficult." "Human," she told him after the second escape. "Your job is to guard the queen," Marcus pointed out. "I am not anywhere near the queen. My job is now to watch you," Sereth said. And there was something in her voice that might have been frustration or might have been amusement. "The queen has taken an interest in your activities. I am flattered." "You should be terrified," Marcus shrugged, because fear had become such a constant companion that he barely noticed it anymore. Sereth began to shadow him after that, appearing at odd moments throughout the day to observe his activities. And Marcus found himself strangely comfortable with her presence. She was cold and distant and clearly viewed him as something less than a person. But she was also honest in a way that the other Volanthi were not. And Marcus could respect honesty, even when it came wrapped in contempt. Incident with the venomous creature happened in his third week. Marcus was teaching a group of small fuzzy beings how to weave baskets when the alarm started blaring, and he looked up to see chaos erupting across the menagerie as guards rushed toward the northern sector. A creature had escaped its enclosure, something called a Crix, according to the panic chatter on the guard frequencies. And it was venomous enough to kill anything it touched. Marcus should have run the other way like everyone else was doing. But he could hear screaming from the northern sector, and he could see the guards hesitating at the tree line, because even they were afraid of this thing. Grabbed a length of metal pipe from a maintenance station and ran toward the danger. The Crix was horrible, all legs and mandibles and dripping venom. And it had cornered a group of smaller creatures against a rock face and was moving in for the kill. Marcus did not think. He just acted. He used the pipe to bang against rocks and trees, making as much noise as possible. And the Crix turned toward him with a hiss that sounded like death itself. "Hey, ugly," Marcus shouted. "Over here." The creature charged and Marcus ran, leading it away from the helpless captives and toward a clearing where he had noticed a maintenance shaft. Earlier that week, the plan was simple: lure the Crix to the shaft, drop it down, seal the hatch. Problem solved. The execution was messy. The Crix caught him twice, venom searing through his arm and across his ribs. And the pain was like nothing Marcus had ever experienced. Like fire and acid and electricity all at once. But he kept running because stopping meant dying. and he was too stubborn to die in a glorified zoo on an alien planet. He reached the shaft and turned to face the creature, using himself as bait one final time. And when it lunged, he dropped to the ground and rolled aside, and watched it fall into the darkness below. Marcus slammed the hatch shut with shaking hands and engaged the lock. And then he collapsed onto his back and stared up at the artificial sky and laughed until he cried. The guards found him there, bleeding and poisoned and somehow still alive, and Sereth was with them, her golden eyes wide with something Marcus could not name. "You are welcome," Marcus managed to say before the darkness took him. By the way, he woke in a medical bay 3 days later, his body wrapped in bandages and attached to machines that beeped an unfamiliar rhythm. Sereth was standing by the window, watching him with an expression he still could not read. "The physician said you should have died," she told him. "The Crick's venom is fatal to every known species. Humans are stubborn," Marcus said, his voice rough. "So I am learning," Sereth replied, and for the first time since they met. There was no contempt in her voice. She reported to the Queen that the human was defective, that something was wrong with him, that he refused to behave like a proper captive should the Queen, intrigued by this assessment, demanded to see him personally. Marcus had no idea what was waiting for him. But as the guards came to escort him to the throne room, he caught Sereth watching him again. "Any advice?" he asked. Hirsch tilted her head in that curious gesture he was starting to recognize. "Do not die," she said. Marcus smiled. "Despite everything, I will do my best." The Queen's interest. Queen Nixara was old. Marcus could see it in the way she held herself. Not with weakness, but with the weight of centuries. And her scales had faded from deep purple to something closer to silver. And her golden eyes held the kind of tired wisdom that only came from watching generations rise and fall. She sat on a throne carved from a single, massive crystal that pulsed with inner light. And the court around her was filled with Valanti nobles who watched Marcus with a mixture of curiosity and disgust. He was still bandaged from his encounter with the Cricks, still weak from the venom that should have killed him. And he had to lean on a guard just to stay upright as he was brought before the Queen. "So," Nixara said, and her voice was deeper than Sereth's, rougher, like stones grinding together. "This is the human who has caused such disruption in my menagerie, Your Majesty," Marcus said. And he tried to bow, but his ribs screamed in protest, so it came out more like an awkward nod. "I prefer to think of it as creative reorganization." The court gasped at his casual tone, and several nobles reached for weapons. But the Queen raised one clawed hand and silence fell instantly. "They told me you were defective," she said. "That something was wrong with you." "Many things are wrong with me," Marcus admitted. "But I like to think of them as features rather than bugs." Nixara stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus forced himself to meet her gaze, even though every instinct screamed at him to look away. Then she laughed. It was not a pleasant sound, harsh and rasping like she had forgotten how to do it, but it was genuine. And the court seemed to collectively stop breathing, because apparently the Queen laughing was not something that happened. "You are either very brave or very stupid," Nixara said. "My commanding officer in the Marines said the same thing," Marcus replied. She never did figure out which one it was. The Queen leaned forward on her throne, and Marcus could see genuine curiosity in her ancient eyes. "Tell me, human, do you know why you are here?" "Presumably because I made your fish tank more interesting." Another laugh, shorter this time. And Nixara gestured for the guards to release him. "Walk with me," she commanded. The court erupted in protest. Nobles shouting about protocol and propriety, and the danger of allowing a lesser species so close to the Queen. But Nixara silenced them with a look and rose from her throne. Marcus followed her out of the throne room and into a garden that stretched beyond the palace walls, filled with plants from 100 worlds and pathways that wound through impossible landscape. Aside, followed at a distance. Close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough to give them privacy. I have ruled the Volanti sovereignty for 317 years, Nixara said as they walked. I have conquered worlds and crushed rebellions and built an empire that spans a quarter of the galaxy. That sounds exhausting. Marcus said. The Queen glanced at him with surprise, then nodded slowly. It is, she admitted. I have everything a ruler could want. Power and wealth and subjects who fear me, and I am bored beyond measure. That is why you collect things, Marcus said. Understanding dawning, the menagerie, the curiosities. You are looking for something interesting, and I found you, Nixara said. Stopping to face him, a human who runs toward danger instead of away, who turns a prison into a community, who looks at the most powerful ruler in the galaxy and makes jokes. I make jokes because if I stop making jokes, I will start screaming, Marcus told her honestly. And once I start screaming, I might never stop. Something shifted in the Queen's expression. Something that looked almost like respect. You are not what I expected. Human. Neither are you, Marcus replied. I expected a monster. And what do you see instead? Marcus considered the question carefully because he sensed that his answer mattered. I see someone who has been alone for a very long time, he said finally. Someone who has forgotten what it feels like to be surprised. The Queen was silent for a long moment. Then she turned and continued walking. You will not return to the menagerie, she announced. You will stay in the palace as my guest, free to roam under Commander Sarath's supervision. Am I still a prisoner? Yes, Nixara said without hesitation, but you are an interesting prisoner. And that counts for something. The weeks that followed were strange. Marcus was given quarters in the palace, small but comfortable, and he was allowed to go almost anywhere as long as Sarath accompanied him. Commander was clearly unhappy with her new assignment at first, viewing babysitting duty as beneath her station. But something changed as the days passed. They sparred together in the training rooms, and Sarath won every time. But Marcus kept getting up no matter how many times she knocked him down. Why do you keep trying? She asked after one particularly brutal session. You cannot beat me. I am not trying to beat you, Marcus said, wiping blood from his lip. I am trying to get better. For what purpose? Because giving up is not in my nature. He taught the palace servants to read, having discovered that literacy was considered unnecessary for lower castes. And Sarath watched with confusion as he spent hours helping them form letters and sound out words, introduced the Queen to human concepts, showing her videos from Earth's history, explaining democracy and civil rights and the idea that all beings had inherent worth. Your species believes this, Nixara asked one evening, watching footage of a human rights march. That the lowest among you deserves the same dignity as the highest. We believe it, Marcus said. We are not always good at living up to it, but we believe it. He made the Queen laugh more times in a month than she had laughed in the previous decade. And he saw her ancient eyes spark with something that might have been hope, but there were shadows gathering. Marcus noticed the whispers in the court, the hostile glances from certain nobles. The way conversation stopped when he entered room. Sarath noticed too. The purists, she told him one night as they walked through the gardens. A faction of nobles who believe in Volanti supremacy above all else. They see the Queen's interest in you as weakness. Are they dangerous? Sarath's golden eyes gleamed in the darkness. Very. And what do you believe? Marcus asked. About lesser species. She was quiet for a long time before answering. I believed what I was taught, she said finally. That Volanti were superior, that other species existed only to serve or be conquered. And now Sarath looked at him, and Marcus saw something in her expression that he could not quite identify. Now I am less certain. A commotion near the palace drew their attention. Raised voices and the sound of weapons being drawn. And Sarath moved toward the disturbance with Marcus close behind. They found a group of purist nobles confronting a young servant who had dropped a tray of food. Clumsy animal. One of the nobles snarled, raising a hand to strike Marcus, stepped between them before Sareth could stop him. "Touch that kid, and we are going to have a problem," he said. The noble stared at him with pure hatred. "You dare to interfere?" "Human, I dare to do a lot of things." Sareth intervened before violence could erupt, her authority as commander of the Queen's Guard forcing the nobles to back down. But Marcus saw the promise in their eyes. This was not over as they walked back to the palace. Sareth was unusually quiet. "That was reckless," she said finally. "That kid was scared." "You could have been killed," Marcus shrugged. "Some things are worth the risk." Sareth stopped walking and turned to face him. And in the moonlight, her scales seemed to shimmer with inner fire. "You are the strangest creature I have ever met," she said. "Is that a compliment?" She did not answer, simply turned and continued walking, but Marcus could have sworn he saw her smile. The storm was coming. He could feel it in the tension that filled the palace. But for the first time since his capture, Marcus felt something that might have been hope. Whatever happened next, he would not face it alone. "You're amazing." The coup began at midnight. Marcus was asleep in his quarters when the first explosion rocked the palace, and he was on his feet with a makeshift weapon in his hand before the second blast finished echoing through the corridors. Something was wrong. Something beyond the obvious chaos. And it took him a moment to realize what it was. Her vet not come. She had checked on him every night since his arrival. A brief appearance to ensure he had not escaped or caused trouble. And her absence now felt like a missing heartbeat. Marcus did not think. He just ran. The palace was in chaos. Guards fighting guards, nobles screaming, servants fleeing in every direction. And Marcus dodged through the madness with a single thought burning in his mind. Find Sarath. Found her in the eastern corridor, collapsed against a wall with her scales flickering between colors in a way that looked deeply wrong. "Marcus," she gasped when she saw him, and her voice was strained, barely audible. "Poison paralytic. I cannot move." He was at her side in an instant, checking her pulse, trying to assess the damage. "How long do you have?" "Hours before it kills me," she managed. "Minutes before full paralysis. You must go. Warn the Queen." "The purists are. I am not leaving you." Her golden eyes flashed with frustration. "I am already compromised. The Queen matters more. She's the target." Marcus looked down at her. This warrior who had watched over him for months, who had slowly become something he had not expected and could not name. And he made a decision. "Then we better move fast." He lifted her, ignoring her protests and his own screaming muscles, and carried her through the burning corridors toward the Queen's chambers. The paralysis was spreading. He could feel her body growing heavier as her muscles stopped responding. And by the time they reached the royal wing, she could barely move her head. He set her down against a pillar, where she could see the entrance to the Queen's inner sanctum. And her eyes tracked him with an intensity that burned through the paralytic haze. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Something stupid," Marcus admitted. "Just watch." He picked up a fallen guard's blade and walked toward the sounds of fighting. There were 6 assassins in the Queen's chambers when Marcus arrived. Purist nobles in ceremonial armor who had clearly expected to face loyal guards. Not a single battered human with a stolen sword. Queen Nixara was on the ground, unconscious from what looked like a blow to the head. And the assassins were arguing about the cleanest way to kill her. "Excuse me," Marcus said from the doorway. And 6 heads turned toward him with matching expressions of disbelief. "The human?" One of them laughed. "Step aside, little creature. This does not concern you." "I respectfully disagree." The first assassin moved toward him with casual confidence, clearly expecting an easy kill. Marcus had spent 8 years as a Marine, had trained in close combat on 3 different worlds, had survived situations that should have killed him a dozen times over, but more than that. He was human. The Volanti were stronger than him, faster than him, built for combat in ways that made him look like a child playing with toys, that they had never seen a human fight. Really fight. Fight like everything depended on it. Fight with the desperate creativity of a species that had clawed its way to dominance on a death world through sheer, stubborn refusal to die. Marcus moved to first. Assassin expected him to block or dodge. So Marcus did neither, stepping inside the swing and driving his blade up through the gap in the armor at the armpit. The second assassin hesitated for half a heartbeat in surprise. And that hesitation cost her life as Marcus spun and opened her throat with a backhand slash. The third and fourth came together, coordinated, professional. And Marcus took a blade through his shoulder to get inside their guard, ignored the agony, and killed them both with strikes so fast his own eyes could barely track them. Adrenaline. The humans called it a chemical cocktail that turned ordinary people into something more, that let mothers lift vehicles off, trapped children and soldiers keep fighting with wounds that should have dropped them. The fifth assassin ran the sixth. The leader stared at Marcus with something approaching fear. "What are you?" he whispered. "I am human," Marcus said. And his voice was steady even though his body was falling apart. "And that woman behind me is under my protection." He killed the sixth assassin slowly, painfully. A message to anyone who might try this again. Then he stood over the queen's unconscious body with blood dripping from wounds he could no longer count. Swaying on his feet, running on nothing but willpower, and Spessereth was watching from the doorway. Her golden eyes wide, her body frozen, but her mind clearly working. "You are amazing," Marcus said to her. Delirious from blood loss and convinced somehow that she had helped. "Really, best bodyguard ever, 10 out of 10. Would recommend?" He collapsed the next thing he knew. He was lying on a medical table with machines beeping and Volanti physicians rushing around him and someone shouting about impossible survival rates and unknown human resilience. He faded in and out for what might have been hours or days, catching fragments of conversation, glimpses of worried faces, the feeling of a clawed hand holding his own when he finally woke properly. Sareth was there. She was sitting beside his bed. Her scales returned to their normal deep purple, her golden eyes fixed on his face with an expression he had never seen before. "The physicians say you should be dead," she told him. "They say your injuries were catastrophic, that no species could survive what you survived. Humans are stubborn," Marcus managed, his voice barely working. "So you keep telling me." The queen appeared in the doorway, looking older than before, but very much alive. And her ancient eyes held something that might have been gratitude. "You saved my life." "Human," Nixar said. "You have earned a boon. Name it and it shall be yours." Marcus thought about it. Thought about freedom and revenge and all the things he could ask for. And then he looked at Sareth and saw something in her eyes that made his choice easy. "I want my freedom," he said. "And I want you to reconsider your position on lesser species." The queen nodded slowly. "Granted. Both requests. You are free to leave whenever you wish. And I will begin reforms to improve the treatment of non-Volanti. Throughout my sovereignty, it was more than Marcus had hoped for. And he felt something in his chest loosen, something that had been tight with fear and anger for months. But before he could respond, Sareth stood. "I invoke the right of Valkyrin," she announced. And her voice rang through the room like a bell. The queen's eyes widened, and murmurs erupted from the physicians and guards. "Commander," Nixar said carefully, "do you understand what you are doing?" "I understand completely," Sarah said. And she turned to face Marcus with an intensity that stole his breath. "I name this human my equal, my match, my mate." The room exploded in chaos. Voices shouting about tradition and propriety and the impossibility of what she was suggesting. But Sareth ignored all of it, her golden eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "In Volanti culture," she said quietly, cutting through the noise, "a mate bond is sacred, unbreakable. But it requires the consent of both parties." Marcus stared at her. This warrior who had watched him with contempt and confusion and slowly growing respect, who had stood beside him through impossible odds, who was now offering him something he had never expected. "You watched me kill 6 people while hallucinating that you helped," he said finally. "You called me amazing." "I was delirious." "You meant it." He had Marcus realized. He had absolutely meant it. The room had gone silent, everyone waiting for his response. And Marcus did the only thing that made sense. He laughed. "Buy me dinner first," he said. Sareth smiled, really smiled. The first genuine smile he had ever seen on her face. "That can be arranged." Queen Nixara watched them both with ancient knowing eyes. "Well," she said dryly, "this is certainly more interesting than I expected." Marcus reached out and took Sareth's clawed hand in his own, feeling the warmth of her scales, the strength in her grip, the promise of something new and terrifying and wonderful. "You know this is insane." "Right," he said. "Yes," she agreed, "and that everyone is going to try to stop us. Let them try." Marcus smiled despite the pain, despite the uncertainty, despite everything. "I really am the luckiest prisoner in the galaxy." "Former prisoner," Sareth corrected. "Right," Marcus said, squeezing her hand. "Former prisoner. Current mate of the most dangerous woman in the sovereignty. Flattery will get you nowhere. Liar." She did not deny it. The human factor 1 year changed everything. Marcus stood before the mirror in his quarters, adjusting the ceremonial armor that Sareth had given him, armor that bore the marks of House Valkyra, and proclaimed him to all who saw it as a warrior of the Volanti sovereignty. He still was not used to it. "You look ridiculous," Sareth said from the doorway. But her voice was warm and her golden eyes sparkled with amusement. "I look amazing, and you know it." She crossed the room and adjusted his collar with practiced hands, her claws gentle against his skin, and Marcus marveled again at how much had changed since the day she had bought him in that slave market there. Bond had been controversial, scandalous, the subject of endless debate throughout the sovereignty. But they had weathered the storm together, and slowly, grudgingly, the Volanti had begun to accept what they could not change. It helped that Marcus kept saving people. He had stopped 3 more assassination attempts, reorganized the palace guard to eliminate corruption, and introduced training methods from human military history that had revolutionized Volanti combat tactics. He had also taught the Queen how to make pizza, which she had declared the most important contribution to Volanti culture in centuries. "Are you ready?" Sareth asked. Today was the day they had been working toward for months. The Galactic Compact Summit, where representatives from every major species would gather to discuss trade and treaties and the endless politics of interstellar civilization. Today was the day humanity's fate would be decided. "No," Marcus admitted. "But when has that ever stopped me?" Sarah smiled and took his hand. "Never." The summit was held on a neutral station at the center of the galaxy, and when the Volanti delegation arrived, the other species stared in disbelief. Commander Sareth Valkyra, legendary warrior, first guard to Queen Nixara, walked at the head of the procession with a human at her side, not behind her, not following as a servant, but beside her as an equal. Marcus could hear the whispers, could see the shock and outrage on alien faces, and he kept his head high and his expression calm. The Volanti had spent years teaching the galaxy that humans were nothing, weak and primitive and suitable only for slavery. And now here was living proof that everything they had said was wrong. The summit chamber was massive, tiered seating rising around a central platform where speakers would address the assembly. And Marcus felt small in a way he had not felt since his first day in the menagerie. Then Sareth squeezed his hand, And he remembered that he was not alone. Queen Nixara took her seat among the other rulers and nodded to Marcus, a gesture of support that sent more whispers rippling through the crowd. The session began with trade agreements and border disputes, the usual tedium of galactic politics. But everyone knew what the real topic would be: humanity. When the compact chairman finally called for discussion of the human question, Marcus stood. The chamber fell silent. "I know what you see when you look at me," he began, and his voice was steady even though his heart was racing. "You see a small creature from a small world, fragile and short-lived and primitive by your standards." He walked to the center platform, feeling the weight of 1,000 alien eyes. The Galactic Compact classified humanity as a minor species 50 years ago, decided that we were suitable for labor and entertainment and nothing else, decided that our lives had no value beyond what we could provide to our masters. His voice grew stronger. "You looked at us and saw weakness, saw short lifespans and fragile bodies and technology centuries behind your own. And you decided that gave you the right to take everything from us." He turned in a slow circle, meeting eyes throughout the chamber. "But you missed something. You missed what makes humans dangerous." Marcus pulled up his sleeve, revealing the scars that covered his arm. The marks of the Crick's venom and the assassin's blades and a dozen other wounds that should have killed him. "I have been poisoned by venoms that kill every other species in the galaxy. And I survived. I have been cut and burned and beaten. And I survived. I have faced odds that no rational creature would challenge. And I survived, not because I am special, not because I am unique, but because that is what humans do." He thought of his father, who had worked 3 jobs to keep the family fed, of his mother, who had raised 4 children alone after the war, of every human who had ever refused to give up when giving up was the sensible choice. "We adapt," he said. "We endure, we get back up. You can enslave us and we will organize. You can imprison us and we will escape. You can underestimate us and we will prove you wrong." His voice rose, "Not because we are the strongest or the fastest or the smartest, not because we have the best weapons or the most advanced technology, but because we are too stubborn to know when we are beaten." He let the words hang in the air. 50 years ago, you decided humanity was nothing. Today I stand before you as the mate of a Volanti commander, the friend of a queen, a warrior who has earned his place among the greatest fighters in the galaxy. I did not do this because I am exceptional. I did this because I am human, and that is the most human thing there is." The silence stretched for a long moment, and then Queen Nixara rose from her seat. "I have ruled the Volanti sovereignty for over 3 centuries, she said. "I have seen species rise and fall, have watched empires crumble and civilizations burn. And in all that time, I have never encountered anything like this human." She looked at Marcus with something like pride. "He saved my life. Not once, but several times, he changed my empire. Not through force, but through example. He showed my people that strength comes in many forms, and that the measure of a species is not in their technology or their physical power, but in their spirit. I call for humanity's status to be elevated. They have earned their place among us." The vote was not unanimous. There were species who clung to their prejudices, who refused to see humans as anything more than convenient slaves. But the majority ruled humanity was no longer a minor species. It was not equality, not yet. There were still battles to fight, and minds to change, and a galaxy of prejudice to overcome. But it was a start. After the session ended, Marcus found himself surrounded by delegates from species he had never met, all of them curious about the human who had changed everything. Sarth stayed close, her presence a comfort and a warning to anyone who might try to cause trouble when they finally escaped to their ship. Marcus collapsed into a chair and let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for a year. "We did it," he said. "You did it," Sarth corrected. Sitting beside him, I merely watched. You did more than watch. You believed in me when no one else did. You gave me a chance when everyone else saw me as nothing." She was quiet for a moment. "I did not believe in you," she admitted. "Not at first. I believed you were interesting, unusual, worth studying." And now, she turned to face him, and her golden eyes held a warmth that still surprised him. "Now I believe you are the most remarkable creature I have ever known." Marcus felt his heart swell. "That is the nicest thing you have ever said to me." "Do not get used to it." He laughed and pulled her close, and she allowed it, her scales warm against his skin, her arms strong around him. "We are heading to Earth next," Marcus said. "I am going to introduce you to my mother." Sareth tensed. "She is going to hate me. She is going to love you. You kept me alive. You kept yourself alive. I merely observed." "See," Marcus grinned. "You are amazing." Sareth smirked. The same smirk from the auction block all those months ago. And Marcus felt something settle in his chest. A feeling of rightness, of belonging. "And you are mine." "Human," she said. "Yeah," Marcus agreed, taking her hand. "I really am." The ship's engines hummed to life, and they began the journey to Earth, to his home, to a future that neither of them had expected, but both of them had earned. Marcus looked out the viewport at the stars streaming past, and he thought about everything that had brought him here. The capture and the fear and the pain and the impossible odds. He thought about a species that had been dismissed as nothing, and a single human who had refused to accept that judgment. He thought about love found in the strangest places, and hope kindled in the darkest times, and he smiled, because that was the human thing to do. "Hey, Sareth," he said. "Yes. Thank you for buying me at that auction." She was quiet for a moment. Then she squeezed his hand. "Thank you for being worth buying." Marcus laughed, and the sound echoed through the ship. Bright and warm and full of promise. The stars stretched out before them, endless and unknown. And somewhere out there was Earth, and his mother, and a galaxy that was slowly learning what humanity could do. Marcus Chun, former slave, current warrior, beloved mate of Commander Seraph Valkyra, leaned back in his chair and watched the universe go by. He had a feeling the adventure was just beginning.